Technology Integration Report by Melinda Spence. For this practicum, I was in a 4th grade classroom. My class had 32 students, and the available technology that I had was a smartboard, a microphone, a document camera, and a laptop computer. When I was planning my lesson, it was going to be a whole class lesson, and since there were so many students, I wanted to use technology that the entire class would be able to benefit from. So I decided to use the smartboard. This technology was something that was going to be engaging and involve all of the students in the class. It was something that the whole class could see and participate with, and as people were coming up to the board, we would know what the other students were thinking because they were sharing it to the class. For this lesson, I taught a math lesson on capacity, and one of the main things that we were focusing on is being able to estimate how much a certain object could hold and what the capacity of that object would be. So I decided to create a PowerPoint, and on the different slides, the students would have opportunities to estimate the capacity of different objects. Because we are going to be doing a lot of estimating, using the smartboard would allow students to be able to see what other students what their estimations were. And so as they came up to write their estimations on the board, students would be able to interact with technology as well as provide an efficient way for everyone to be able to share their estimations. Also, by writing their estimations on the smartboard, we could compare what one person had said with what another person thought, and we would be able to go back to these estimations when we needed to because they were already going to be written down where the whole class could see it. At the beginning of my lesson, we talked about what capacity was, and I introduced them to what's called the gallon man so that they were able to compare the different units of capacity with another so that they could more easily figure out how many of one unit of capacity fit into another. I then read to the class a book called Room for Ripley, where a little boy goes to get a fish as a pet, and he's estimating how much water he will need and that can fit in to his new fish bowl. During the middle of the book, we paused, and I had the students estimate how much they thought that the fish bowl would be able to hold. This slide is where students were going to be able to make estimations for how much capacity the fishbowl would hold. As we finished reading the book, we discovered that the boy's fishbowl ended up holding 1 gallon of water. When we finished reading the story, we talked about everyone's estimations and went back to what their predictions had been and how they compared to the actual capacity that the fishbowl could hold. The next activity that I had the students do is I brought in multiple containers shown on this PowerPoint slide: a cereal bowl, a vase, a paper cup, and a bucket. The students estimated the capacity that each of these containers held. Once students had written down their predictions, I demonstrated the actual capacity by filling each container up, and the students were able to see how much each container was actually able to hold. Then we moved on to some more practical application, where students saw these problems and were able to choose from the units of capacity as to which one would best be used to measure these different objects' capacity. The lesson overall went really well, and I learned a lot from doing it. The first thing that I learned is that planning is critical, and there's lots of technologies out there that we can use, and we need to make sure that we plan effectively for how to use them in the classroom. Because technology can be effective and it can be engaging, and I learned that it's fun and it changes things up. My teacher doesn't usually use a lot of technology except for the document camera, so the students were excited to see that they were able to use something that they weren't used to using, and that kept them motivated and engaged during my lesson. Some things that didn't go well was that the technology didn't actually work. I went in that morning and it wasn't working, and because I was being evaluated for this particular lesson in the morning, we didn't have time to go back and fix things so that I was able to use it. I ended up printing out sheets and copies of my PowerPoint so that students could still have some place to write down their estimations so that we could still talk about them, but they weren't actually interacting with the technology. I was actually able to go into another classroom, and she let me practice on her smartboard so that I could see what it would have been like had the technology worked. And so these are some images that you're seeing as me going into the other classroom and practicing on her smartboard so that in the future we know how to fix the problems that we had in the first place of it not working. Something that I would do next time is make sure that the technology works, and do that by practicing and making sure that what you have planned is going to work for your students. Another thing that I learned that it is important is to have kind of a backup plan in case technology doesn't work, because it's not always the most reliable thing, but if we're able to practice and make sure that things are set up for a class, then it can definitely be an engaging, effective, and motivating tool to use in your classroom. And it's important to change things up for the students so that they stay motivated and stay engaged. So overall, I feel that the lesson went really well and that I learned a lot from using this technology lesson. Just as a side note, as I was going back looking at what I had recorded, and it's hard to go back and fix things that you had already recorded, I just wanted to clarify that the PowerPoint that I used did work, and I was able to show the PowerPoint on the smartboard. However, the interacting with the smartboard and the smartboard tools were the things that did not work. The end.